Chapter 7, Drinking at Night, Dreaming of a Sea. Looking at the roof of the tent, Ning's mind floated back to the traces of what had happened since leaving Weiqing. Along the way, that luxurious carriage had always had its curtains tightly closed, and apart from the little boy who clearly had barbarian blood who would occasionally get out of the car to play, there was no chance of seeing any princesses at all, except for that clear and haughty maidservant who issued orders from time to time. For some reason, that handmaiden liked to call Sang Sang over for a chat. Still, for some reason, that servant girl didn't hide her distaste for him. Ning felt that she was a very good actress. Because whether it was in Weiqing or on the journey, whether it was the attitude of those grassland Hanyu ministers or the temperament and demeanor that she herself exuded, it was hard to tell that she wasn't a handmaiden. It was this that made him feel a little strange. He always thought that those true nobles in the upper echelons of the great Tang Empire shouldn't have too much sympathy for Sang Sang's idle thoughts. However, these weren't the things he really cared about. What he had always paid attention to within a few days was the old man in the carriage wearing an old robe, and if his guesses were right, that old man with the gentle expression should be the Hao Tiandao Southgate guru that General Ma had mentioned. From a very young age, Ning had aspired to set foot in that arcane world, but had been slow to enter it, and he had been willing to follow this group back to the capital precisely because there was such a true cultivator in the group. Unfortunately, on this journey, he never found a chance to talk to the old man who was closely protected. Only when he was dining in the camp, occasionally he was able to meet the old man's eyes for a moment. And during that moment he seemed to see the old man's gaze in a gentle and friendly and even encouraging meaning, which made him unable to help but be a little puzzled again. After pondering and analyzing the situation, Ning returned his attention, only to realize that the pair of small feet in his arms had never been warmed, and were still as cold as ice, and even his own chest and abdomen were also cold, so he couldn't help but knit his brow in worry. The little maid Sang Sang had suffered too much as a child, wrapped up in the wind and rain rotting gas for days in the pile of dead bodies beside the road, and was picked up by him after a serious illness, which lasted for months and months without getting well. Weiqing military doctors have seen. He also took her to the distant Kaiping province to see. All the doctors are same opinion: congenital insufficiency, body cold. Because of her extremely cold constitution, Sang Sang was rarely able to sweat, and the waste and toxins she produced daily could not be eliminated, making her body worse and worse with each passing day. So Ning followed the doctor's instructions and let her engage in a guaranteed large dose of exercise every day, used to slightly improve the cold environment within her body, and that was precisely why, in the eyes of outsiders, he had always used this dark, skinny little maid as a donkey and horse to make her do her work. Even with this kind of hard work every day, it didn't necessarily turn Sang Sang's physique warm every time, just like the woolen mattress that was like an ice cellar at this very moment. Ning climbed up, rubbed his almost frozen stomach, fished out the cowhide wine bag from the corner, patted Sang Sang awake, and then handed the bag to her lips. Sang Sang opened her eyes in a daze, naturally took the wine bag, skillfully unscrewed the stopper, tilted her neck and poured it into her lips. The wine did not spill a single drop, but the tent was still filled with a spicy wine aroma, and it seemed that it should be the strong wine that cuts the throat in the grasslands. The skinny little maid held a large wine bag and drank bitterly, 2 bowls of strong wine that could whip over a big man, but she drank down a small half of the bag until her belly bulged slightly. This scene is hard to describe with bravado. It is better to say that it is a bit bizarre. She wiped her lips, her willow-like eyes growing brighter in the darkness of the night, not even looking like she had been drinking, and smiled at Ning, before collapsing back down to continue sleeping. The room was filled with the scent of spirits. The cold little feet in his arms gradually warmed up, and Ning looked at the few drops of sweat seeping out of the tip of her nose, finally letting go of his heart and wiping the sweat from his own forehead. Wrapped tight wool mattress, Ning slowly closed his eyes. Not far from his face is that volume has long been torn Taishang Inductions. Every day before he goes to sleep he reads a few pages. Even if he doesn't read it, he will silently memorize it in his mind. This is a habit that has been developed over the years. May all sentient beings have the full practice of the law of freedom from old age and death, and all calamities and poisons not harm their lives. May all sentient beings attain immortality from old age and disease, abide in the root of life, and enter the path of wisdom with courage and vigor. In shallow sleep, his spirit ran slowly along with the words on the scroll, along with the seemingly shallow and simple, but actually ambiguous and difficult to understand, laws of perception. Gradually, the woolen mattress covering his and Song Song's bodies disappeared, the small, simple tent disappeared, the grass outside the tent disappeared, and the brook turned into a white mist and then tended to become invisible, turning the entire world into a heaven and earth where you have me, and I have you, and in which a certain kind of mysterious rhythmic respiration could be vaguely sensed, and the breadth between heaven and earth filled up to become a sea of warmth. This kind of magical feeling was not unfamiliar to Ning. After he had first watched the Taishang induction chapter many years ago, he had often been able to sense it before he fell asleep, but he was very clear about one sad fact. This was not a real perception after meditation, but only a dream. The warmth of the ocean was probably just an illusion in the dream, as the pair of little feet wrapped in thick cotton socks in his arms gradually warmed up, but it was also an extremely beautiful illusion. Self-assured in this way, Ning entered a deep sleep, a night of dark sweetness and dreamlessness. Waking up early the next morning, Ning slept extremely well, but his expression looked like he was extremely eager to sleep for another 3 days and nights, full of consternation and dissatisfaction. Why did you temporarily change your route? He looked at the indifferent-looking servant girl in front of him, suppressing his emotions and saying as gently as he could, crossing Minshan Mountain and heading straight for the Huashi Dao, there won't be any problems with the route I chose. Including that maidservant, none of the people in the tent answered his query. I'm a guide, and you guys aren't familiar with Minshan at all. Ning looked at the servant girl and said after a moment of silence, I know you're worried about encountering an ambush, and I can assure you that as long as you listen to me, no one will be able to stop you. The servant girl gave him a look as if she were looking at a stone, trying to convey a clear meaning. Roughly, what qualifications do you have to ask me to explain to you? Returning to his tent, Ning looked at Sang Sang, who was packing his bags, and said, send them down this big straight road, and we'll withdraw immediately. Taking out the simple map that he had hand-drawn back then, he pointed to one of the places and said, at the furthest we can follow them, we can only follow them as far as this place, and if we go any further, the other side would only need to send a few horsemen over to slaughter the entire group. You should convince them, Samson said, tilting his head. I'm guessing that there are troops over there to receive the princess, so they won't listen to me. Ning replied, I'm not good at convincing a bunch of piggy partners. Sang Sang didn't say anything, asking with her eyes, if there's someone there to receive her, why are you still so worried and even ready to slip away halfway through the trip? I have a problem with my intuition. Ning replied, because I believe that a raw character who dares to assassinate the fourth princess of the Great Tang would definitely not be as idiotic as that woman without a few preliminaries. Sang Sang was about to speak and reminded, you need to speak to her more politely. I know her true identity. Ning raised his eyebrows slightly and said mockingly, so what if she's a princess? I told you in Weiqing that this is an idiot princess.